I think that our rush to get back to normalcy has caused us to over and over again be unproductive in bringing about long-term systemic changes that are actionable, that are satisfying, and that causes America to live up to its creed and its highest ideals. We've got the right ideals, we just don't live up to them.
Oh, say it now, say it now, say it now, say it now.
Hi, I'm Sally Quinn, author, journalist, and contributor to the Washington Post. Today we're going to discuss the evangelical Christians and their vote. We have two great guests today, and our first guest, I'm happy to say, is Bishop T.D. Jakes from the Potter's House in Dallas, Texas. Welcome, Bishop Jakes.
Thank you for having me, Sal. I'm
But
great. It's good.
I just want to remind you that the last time I interviewed you, we were on a tight budget and we didn't have a makeup person, so I had to make you up right before the interview.
I remember that.
and, and I still have the little makeup thing, which is now in a box with my prized possessions.
Oh, that's so sweet of you. That's so sweet. I could have used you today.
You can use a little powder, but
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, today I want to start out by asking you about three issues that are forefront in all of our minds: racism, coronavirus, and police brutality. And all of those are affecting the Black community more than anybody else in this country. I just want you to find out whether you think that the white Christians are speaking up enough about this issue.
I don't know about enough. I don't know that anybody is speaking up enough about it, but I am pleased to see that there is more unification around some of these issues than there has been historically. We've definitely got a long ways to go, and I'm not implying that we're united on the issues as we should be. I think that our country and people of faith in particular have a tendency to be nose blind. That means that they're not affected by what they're accustomed to. Whereas in the Black community, we have to be affected by it because we live with it every day. But there's more buy-in now than there has been historically, and that's encouraging.
And you're talking about buy-in among the white evangelical Christians?
Yes, I am. I'm talking about if you looked at the people who were protesting, there were as many whites out there as there were blacks, and I'm not sure that they were all Christians, but they were all concerned. We did not see that diversity in the 60s that we're seeing today, and that all by itself is encouraging. I think that white evangelicals are trying to find their voice about this issue. They're a little uncomfortable when they say something. They're afraid of being criticized or saying something wrong. No matter what you say, you're going to be criticized in this polarized society by one side or the other. And ministers are trying to figure out how do they engage the conversation and not lose their own constituency.
Do you think that some Black Christians have given up on white Christians, evangelical Christians?
Yes, I think that the divide between white Christians and Black Christians is broader than it's ever been, because it's not that we don't agree about faith, but whenever faith becomes too politicized, it's to the detriment of both parties. And I think both sides have been politicized to a degree that it has created a further gulf that Dr. King described 60 years ago as being 11 o'clock being the most divided hour in the country. I think that is exacerbated in this current climate where everybody is so tribalist.
You said and have said you cannot be a good Christian and be silent. And yet there's so many, particularly white evangelical Christians, who have been silent. And as you say, a lot of the white evangelical Christian ministers, and I know this from talking to people about this issue, they're afraid to speak up. But I mean, is that really the bottom line for you, that you can't be a good Christian and stay silent?
I think there is a mandate. The Bible says, Jesus said, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me and has anointed me to preach to the brokenhearted, to bind up the wounds of the brokenhearted. I don't think that you can see someone bleeding and walk across on the other side of the street and say that you are Christ-like. Having said that, I do sympathize or empathize with white Christians who have tried to say something and really ended up sticking their foot in the mouth. And behind the scenes, I've called some of them and encouraged them to keep talking. There's going to be criticism. You're not going to get it right at first, but we're having a very difficult conversation that's several hundred years old. And I would rather you break the silence and say something wrong than not say anything at all and act like you don't see the innocent killings of our people, that you don't see that we can't go jogging, that you don't see that we're not safe in our own homes, that you don't see George Floyd screaming for his dead mother while he dies on the sidewalk. To act oblivious to that is the antithesis to everything that Christ stood for. And so you may struggle to do it, but I think it ought to be done.
And when you have these conversations, what do they say to you?
A lot of it is fear, and a lot of it is not knowing how, and a lot of it is never addressing it before, and a lot of it is the privilege that Black people have not enjoyed. We cannot, as a Black person, get a GED in this country without understanding how the white community works. But you can
What,
get a PhD and not understand how the Black community works. And so that's a luxury that is forcing people to have to study. During the George Floyd crisis, books on Black history were the fastest selling books in the country because people were having to bone up on something that they didn't know anything about. They didn't know anything about Juneteenth. They didn't know anything about the rioting in Tulsa. They didn't know anything about Rosewood. And those are things that have not been taught in our schools or talked about in non-Black circles. And finally, they are starting to be talked about today.
when you talk about the division, and particularly the 11 o'clock is the most segregated hour on Sunday, what do you think the difference is between the roles of a Black pastor and a white pastor today?
Oh, I think it's quite huge. We are expected to do things that white pastors are not expected to do because the civil rights movement back in the 60s was born out of the church, because the first schools were in our churches. Our churches have to be more than just spiritual institutions. They have to be the hub of the community. They have to be engaged in the public square, being a voice for the voiceless. They have to be so many more things than what white pastors are accustomed to having to do. We have to be therapists and counselors and a whole lot of other things. And most of our heroic figures down through history have come out of the pulpit, whereas the white community has a wide array of heroic figures. But up until President Obama, we never had a president. All we had were pastors, whether you were Reverend Jesse Jackson or Reverend Al Sharpton, or whether you were Reverend Frederick Douglass, all the way back to those days. They were always clergy. So the definition of what clergy means to us is somewhat different. I want to quickly interject this too. Most of us vote around the issues that we have been taught that are important to our community. We share fidelity with the white evangelicals on conservative ideas and principles, but we don't have the luxury to vote in a myopic way about that, because what we don't share is the concern about the digital divide, the lack of housing, the lack of pay opportunities, the criminal justice system, the Black on Black crime, the blue on Black crime, the police brutality are not things that are on the white clergy's radar. And finally, they're starting to get on that radar, but they have not been historically. So we can't vote with a myopic view of just a few issues. We have to look at the totality of the human experience and not just a couple of items.
So a lot of what you focus on is economic issues with your congregation.
Economic, not really. Economic, education, housing opportunities, digital divide, lifestyle issues, bread and butter issues, issues that affect the well-being of our community and our family, and the many single mothers that are fighting for rights, who are paid less because they're Black and because they're women. and they become the breadwinners for our families. We have a lot of problems in our community that we have to deal with, and it's not all economic. It's social. I don't care how wealthy you are. If you're driving down the street and blue lights go off behind you, your heart races because you're not sure. Amongst the many wonderful police officers that we have, I actually pastor the chief of police for the city of Dallas. Lots of police officers go to my church. I know they're great police officers, but the misnomer today is that if you criticize the few that are not doing well and you draw attention to that, then you don't support the blue. Everybody has to choose a side to the chagrin of the other side, when in reality, you can support great police officers and still hold other police officers accountable, like we do doctors, like we do pilots, like we do anything else. But in this climate we're in right now, we have lost our ability to reason together and to come to compromise and to understand that saying one thing does not negate the other.
How do you feel about the slogans "All Lives Matter" and "Blue Lives Matter"?
Well, let me respond to it like this. When we have Breast Cancer Month, we don't say, you didn't say anything about Alzheimer's. Uh, when a house is on fire, you don't complain to the fireman because he didn't stop at every house. You go to the house that's on fire, and right now, black and brown houses are on fire. And the statement "Black Lives Matter" does not mean that white lives do not matter. Absolutely does not mean that, but it does mean that these are the lives that are disproportionately on fire, not only by criminal justice, not only by police brutality, but also by the COVID virus. When you say Black Lives Matter, it's not just about brutality, it's about education, it's about opportunities, it's about health issues. It covers a whole gambit of things where we have been demoralized. It's about the high rate of deaths of our women when they have children. There's so many areas. In almost every area, it is reinforced that we don't get the same medical care, the same health care, the same education. It does make you ask the question, do we matter?
Is there anything that the Black Lives Matter movement is doing that you think is unwise? Are they getting it wrong or right most of the time?
First of all, I think that this has gone far beyond the movement. The organization has turned into a movement. The organization is one thing, the movement is something completely different. The slogan has taken on all over the world until you have people all over the world in Europe and Africa carrying Black Lives Matter signs. That is not all connected to the organization. And I think what has taken place is that many people have bought into the reality that they want to be a part of history that says Black lives do matter. I appreciate that. I support that. I endorse the overall concept Black Lives Matter. In and apart from the organization and its values and what it's trying to do, I think it has taken on a life of its own. However, I don't think that we can win this battle just by protests. At some point, protests have to convert to the change of policies. And I think we're at that point right now. And we have to move away and disavow all violence. I think it's a distraction from the overall message that we're trying to make. And we need to take our violence and turn it into votes. And on every level of government, vote for the people who get and understand that we are not willing to live with these abnormalities and these discrepancies in our care, in our safety, in our well being. Anytime you're not safe in your own home, Breonna Taylor laying in her own bed, anytime you can't go jogging, that's too much to tell us to be quiet about. We cannot be quiet about that knee on that neck. We just cannot be quiet about that.
What has Donald Trump done right on the Black Lives Matter issue? And what do you think that the role is of a president during a time like this?
I don't know what he's done right about the Black Lives Matter issue. I will give credit to the criminal justice strides that have been made. I think those were important strides to have been made, and I think they're a step in the right direction. I hope that the states will follow the federal example because the vast majority of African Americans are not in federal prisons. So I do tip my hat to that. I do think that the opportunity zones was well intended, and I think we have to work harder to make sure that it does what it was intended to do in upgrading the standards of the community. As far as I know, he has avoided supporting Black Lives Matter in any way, and I wish that were different. But I am no longer looking to the White House to fix this issue. I think that the people on the streets of America, we the people, have to rise up and reshape our country and our world without just waiting for this Messiah-like figure to come in and fix all the problems and ills that exist in America today.
You have a foundation and you have a plan. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I started the TD Jakes Foundation, and I started it because I was concerned about housing. I'm concerned because Black, white, and brown people often cannot afford to live in the cities that they serve. We clapped for them as first responders during COVID-19. We gave them flowers. Our church went out and fed them. We did all sorts of things that are wonderful to do. But when they can't afford to live in our cities, that's a problem. So the TD Jakes Foundation is tackling that. We're also tackling the digital divide by doing STEAM programs for underserved communities. We expected to have 500 students to enroll, and we ended up with 5,000 students enrolling into our program, trying to close the digital divide and expose children. What Black children have been exposed to, they have done well. Whether it's basketball, whether it's music, whether it's preaching, those things they've been exposed to, they have become. They have not been exposed to Wall Street. They have not been exposed to Silicon Valley. They have not been exposed to the possibilities that people like them could have a place at the table. And the TD Jakes Foundation is committed to working that out. Jobs, homes, housing, and closing the digital divide.
You mentioned that you didn't think this was should be in the hands of the White House anymore. Have you reached out to President Trump at all? I know that you've advised the last 3 presidents and you've had a very good relationship with them. Do you have a relationship with President Trump?
I do. I have never met him. I've absolutely never met him. And let me be clear, I'm not absolving him of his responsibility. And there's a lot that he could do. And there's a lot that he has said and done that has made it more difficult to move ahead and move forward in the areas of healing some of the disparities that exist in our community. I'm not absolving them from that at all. I'm just steering around the fact that even if we don't get the response that we would like to get from the White House on the level we would like to get it, that still doesn't mean that we can't move forward amongst ourselves.
You know, there's a recent comment that was made by Eric Metaxas, who is a right-wing evangelical. He tweeted that Jesus was white, and it caused a big stir. And then there were all these portraits of people drawing black Jesuses and brown Jesuses and white Jesuses. And I mean, it's quite clear that Jesus probably was not a blue-eyed blonde. And there have been a lot of columns about that. How does that, I'm sure you've heard this, but what do you think about it? I mean, do you think about Jesus and his color?
I don't think about Jesus in terms of color. I think it's an awfully juvenile statement to make one way or the other. As a Christian, the fact that he died for us and shed his blood for us, it wasn't about his skin, it was about his blood. And secondly, the Bible is very clear about his background and his ethnicity, and his Judaistic background is quite clear according to scriptures. And so this American argument where we see everything in black and white and argue back and forth about it means that we do it at the disregard of what the scriptures are very clear about.
So when you pray, you don't think of a color when you pray to Jesus. You just think of.
I don't think color matters. I don't think it matters if you have a car wreck who the EMT is. I don't think it matters if you're being operated on what the ethnicity of your doctor is. I think it's a very juvenile conversation, but I understand that it comes from a place where religion has been complicit in slavery, it has been complicit in Jim Crow, it has been complicit in white supremacy. And I think that the pushback from the Black community, where they want to see a Black Jesus, is really not about Jesus. It's defiance against the fact that God only cares about white people.
I just wanted to ask you one last question about the coronavirus. How has it affected your church, the people in your congregation? And you've said that it's easier to wear a mask than a ventilator, and yet,
Yeah.
the president who mocks people who wear masks, and a large group of many white evangelical Christians who don't believe in wearing masks. What is your view on that?
Well, let me tell you about somebody, as a pastor, regardless of my color, we are the people who bury the people that you report about. So they're numbers to you, but they're bodies to us. We are the ones who answer the phone when their families are screaming. This virus is real. It's serious. It's dangerous, and I don't think that we have handled it appropriately, and I don't think we take it seriously enough. I had a week in 13 days where I didn't have a day go by that somebody didn't die. One day I had three people in the same day. So when you deal with those families firsthand and those people who can't hold the hands of their mothers or their husbands or their loved ones, and sometimes three and four in a family, disproportionately affected Black and brown people as well as white people, it's an atrocity for us. It's been very, very painful. It's an atrocity how we handled it. It's been very painful to watch the needless deaths of people. When you consider how much attention we paid to 9/11, and rightfully so, with 3,000 people, and yet with 200,000 people dead, we tend to want to ignore it or not discuss it or not bring it to the forefront as if it were not a national disaster. We've had more people to die in this country than any other progressive country in the world. That's reprehensible. It's embarrassing, and it's a disregard for human life. You cannot say that you're an advocate for life in the womb if you don't fight for life after the womb.
Bishop Jakes, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I wish we could go on, but I'm so happy to have you join us today, and I hope you'll
Thank,
come back.
thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
I did too. Stay tuned for all of you who are going to stay with us. I'll be back in just a minute with Faith and Freedom Coalition founder Ralph Reed. So stick around. Hi, and welcome back. Our next guest is Ralph Reed, who is the founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, and also a best-selling author. Ralph, I'm so glad to see you again. A fellow Georgian.
Good to be with you, Sally. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm from Savannah. I had grits for breakfast this morning. Did you?
I did not, but I did not know you were from Savannah. I don't know how I didn't know that, but it's nice to have a fellow Georgian on the call today.
Always. I've read part of your book. I've read excerpts, and I've read a lot about your book called God and Country. But first, I just wanted to ask you one question, which is something that many evangelical Christians have said, which is that they do believe that God has sent Trump to save America. Do you believe that?
I don't know. I talk about in the book that there have been some who have said that Donald Trump is a modern day Cyrus or Darius, the Old Testament figures who delivered and acted as saviors of a sort, certainly in a political sense and arguably in a spiritual sense for the Jewish people after the Babylonian captivity. As I say in the book, I've not said that. I don't think we really know until the fullness of time and the unfolding of history what the real role of a figure is. We did not know, for example, that Ronald Reagan played the kind of historic role that he played in vanquishing the former Soviet Union and in a victory in the Cold War over communism until after he had left the presidency. What I can say is that when it comes to the issues that beat in the hearts and give meaning to the souls of tens of millions of voters of faith, whether it's the protection of innocent human life, religious freedom, the First Amendment, the sanctity of the traditional family, the centrality of the traditional family, and the defense and support of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, that Donald Trump has been a champion. And for that reason, I think he's going to get at least the 81% of the evangelical vote that he got 4 years ago and probably higher.
In your book, it's called God and Country, but I read that the original title was Rendered to God and to Trump. Does that mean they're the same?
No, not at all. It was a play on the very historic conversation that Jesus had with the Pharisees, where they brought him a coin and asked whether or not it was lawful for Jews to pay taxes to Caesar. Of course, they were then under the brutal occupation and the subjugation of the Roman Empire. And Jesus very famously replied, "Render to God the things that are God, and render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's." And I argue, not just in the book, but I've argued throughout my career as I've worked within the Christian community to encourage people to be effective citizens, that effectively, Sally, we carry two passports. One passport is for the kingdom of heaven, which is both here today and is yet to come fully. And with that citizenship comes certain responsibilities and obligations and duties, including caring for the poor, worshiping with other believers, tithing and giving to ministry, and reading the Bible and praying regularly. And then we also have an earthly citizenship. And I think in the American context, that passport and that citizenship requires that we be educated and informed, registered to vote, vote in large numbers, and contact our elected officials on the issues and values that we care about. And that was really what that working title was meant to convey.
Do you see Trump as the defender of the faith?
Well, I see Jesus Christ as the Lord, Savior, and defender of the faith. I see Donald Trump as the President of the United States. He's a friend. He's somebody that I've had the privilege and honor of getting to know personally long before he became president. I think he's somebody who's made certain commitments, not just to the faith community, but to the American people that he has kept with regard to being a champion for life, being a defender of religious freedom and our rights under the First Amendment to share our faith and to practice our faith free from persecution and harassment, especially by the government. And he promised to be a friend of the state of Israel, and he has been so. So he's kept his word, not just to us, but to the American people on these, what we consider to be moral issues. And in that sense, I think he's a champion of those issues. But I don't see him beyond that public policy and political context. That, as I said, is something I leave to the good Lord and to the verdict of history.
So the main issues, I think there are a lot of people who really don't understand why Christian evangelicals are so engaged and so favorable toward Trump when often he doesn't necessarily embody what one would think of as Christian values. You talk about the issues that really matter, which are the courts, the abortion, Israel, religious freedom. You've mentioned the
Hmm.
First Amendment twice, and obviously freedom of religion is in the First Amendment, but also freedom of speech. And he's referred many times to journalists as enemies of the people, which is hard to imagine if you are a defender of the First Amendment. And so I wonder if you could explain that, and also to explain why the Christians, the evangelical Christians, are so vehement in their support of Israel.
Well, there's a lot there. I'll tackle the second one first. I think that Christians believe that Jews have suffered historical and invidious persecution um, really throughout history. But in the last 100 years, we've witnessed the pogroms of Tsarist Russia. We've witnessed the Holocaust under Nazi Germany, and we witnessed the anti Semitic regime of the Soviet Union. And so I think uh, evangelicals believe, as a matter of their faith and their reading of Scripture, that God gave the land that is roughly analogous to the modern state of Israel to the Jews, both as their historic homeland with Jerusalem as its capital, and also as a refuge, given the fact that they have actually not been safe in most of the rest of the world. They needed to have a place where they could be safe, and where they could raise their families and practice their faith free from fear of death and persecution and harassment. And so the Christian community has always been a strong supporter of Israel. I can remember as a child growing up in a church, a church going family. I can still remember us going to see The Hiding Place, a movie produced by the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, telling the story of the Ten Boom family of Holland, who protected and hid Jews during the Holocaust, and ultimately they were sent to concentration camps. And members of the Ten Boom family died in Nazi concentration camps because they defended the Jews. And I can remember my mother in a Methodist Bible study reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer's letters from prison. And so, from a very early age, for me, I associated my own Christian faith with the defense of Jews and later the state of Israel. And Donald Trump, by moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, by recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and by making it clear that Jewish neighborhoods in Judea and Samaria, what we refer to in diplomatic language as the West Bank, does not violate international law, and the most recent peace treaties that he has helped usher in with Bahrain and UAE, and we hope others, all helps to protect Israel. With regard to the First Amendment, the other part of your question, I don't think there's anything new about a rhetorically adversarial relationship between presidents and the press. And in fact, under his predecessor, uh, reporters were surveilled, and there have been cases where reporters were jailed for refusing to disclose their sources under prior administrations. Um, and I think that while Donald Trump has a back and forth with the media that can be rhetorically very adversarial, I don't believe for 1 minute that he doesn't value the role that the press plays under our constitutional system. I think he's just calling them to be referees that call balls and strikes rather than wearing the uniform of the other team.
You know, when we talk about those four issues, there are also two issues that you don't mention. One of them recent, both of them recent actually, the coronavirus, which is recent, race relations, which is not recent but has become a major issue in the last several months. How do the evangelical Christian, how does the Christian community respond to the president's reaction to both the coronavirus and the race relations?
Well, I think
And
in terms of race,
you
in
consider
terms
those
of race
issues?
relations, in terms of race relations, speaking just for my organization, Faith and Freedom, we believe that Black lives do matter. We believe that all Black lives matter. So, first of all, we don't favor anyone being discriminated against or being treated as a second-class citizen because of the color of their skin or their ethnic background. Second of all, we believe that the current regime of abortion is a form of African American genocide because even though Blacks represent roughly 1 out of every 10 Americans, they represent 1 out of every 2 abortions. And we point to the eugenic and racist philosophy that Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, argued at the time. And we've called on Planned Parenthood to repudiate that racist heritage. We don't think there's any way around the fact that in looking at a racially just society, if you have 500,000 or more African Americans losing their lives before they're even born, that's an issue of justice. On the issue of education reform, charters, and choice, we believe that far too many minority Americans are living in schools that Bill Bennett famously said could have been designed by the Ku Klux Klan, where they cannot learn, where they are not safe, and where they're not going to have the requisite basic skills to survive. And finally, I'll mention one other issue related to this, criminal justice reform. My organization has been working on criminal justice reform since roughly 2013. We've advocated putting an end to what we believe is an institutionally discriminatory system of criminal justice that disproportionately affects minorities. And it was under Donald Trump that we were able to pass the First Step Act. We tried as hard as we could under Obama. And this is not the format today to discuss why it went awry. But we believe the Obama administration prevented criminal justice reform from happening because of its insistence on certain provisions on which there wasn't bipartisan consensus. So we support all those things. With regard to COVID, I believe that whether it's on mass production of ventilators or the most sophisticated and expansive testing system that the world knows, what we hope under Operation Warp Speed will soon be a vaccine for COVID, and on making the very difficult decision first to impose the travel ban on China and then later to actually shut the economy down for a period of roughly 4 weeks, that Donald Trump took extraordinary and historic steps to save what may well have been hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of lives. And I think, that the criticism of him is mostly political.
For a second, he has sort of mocked people for wearing masks, and he doesn't wear a mask himself, and he's giving these huge rallies where there are thousands of people close together and not wearing masks, and somehow that just doesn't seem Christian to bring people together when, as he told Bob Woodward, he knew how dangerous this virus was. It seems like he's not protecting people, and do you wear a mask? I mean, would you go to a rally where everybody's squinched in together with no masks?
Well, I'm at a conference this week where we're wearing masks, and I'm currently doing Evangelical for Trump campaign events where we're abiding by the public health protocols of whatever state in which we're having the event. and encouraging people to wear masks and wearing masks ourselves. I don't wear a mask when I speak at the podium or on the stage, but sure, we believe in protecting lives. I think where Donald Trump gets high marks from people of faith is he's called on a number of these governors and states to allow churches to reopen. And we have far too many states today where it's okay to go to a liquor store or a massage parlor or a casino, but you can't go to church if there are more than 10 or 50 people, even though some of these churches can hold as many as 1,000 people socially distanced. So, we believe in protecting life and in abiding by public health protocols. What we don't like is when we think the faith community's been targeted in an unfair and even an unconstitutional manner. And on that issue, Donald Trump has been an ally and a champion. The last thing I'll say is with regard to the allegation that he allegedly downplayed the seriousness of the virus. Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that he does not believe that's the case, that he believes that both the president and his coronavirus task force made it abundantly clear in multiple briefings, multiple public health statements, that this was dangerous, and you don't take the unprecedented step of banning travel from China on January 31st, later Europe, and then shutting down the economy for something that wasn't dangerous and lethal. It was very clear that it was.
Ralph, what I'd like to ask you is this: is there anything about Donald Trump that white Christians would ever speak out against? Anything that you would? You know, he had the famous line, which we all know, that he'd walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and they wouldn't care. Do you think that's true? Do you think it's okay? Is there anything he could do that would turn off his base, his voters?
Well, look, I've said many times before that there are things that Donald Trump says and does that I wish he wouldn't say or do. That's not unique to him. I've worked on multiple presidential campaigns. I've worked with many presidents. There are certainly issues, Sally, where we come from or have come from a different viewpoint. And we've communicated that to him in no uncertain terms. We do it in private. We do it respectfully because we think that's the most efficacious way to proceed. I mentioned one of those before, criminal justice reform. He was not, as a candidate in 2016 or in his first year as president, where he is today on criminal justice reform. We've done the same thing on immigration. We favor comprehensive immigration reform that includes a solution for the dreamers. And we've seen him move on that issue. So, no, we're not at 100% agreement on every issue. But I will say this, on the issues that I've mentioned, as well as many other issues that we care deeply about, he's been receptive, he's been open, he's listened. I've seen it. I've seen pastors of multiracial and predominantly Hispanic churches in his presence speak from their hearts about the importance of welcoming the alien and the stranger. And I've seen him receptive to that. So I've just seen a different side of him. Sure, there are things on which we occasionally disagree, including some things that he says or tweets. But in terms of the issues that, as I said, we believe are issues of right and wrong and involve issues of advancing the moral good or resisting grave moral evils like terrorism, hostility to the Jewish people and to Israel, the sanctity of human life. On these, he has been one of the greatest friends and one of the greatest champions that we have ever had.
So we are going to have to stop now, but I just want to ask you, would you say that Donald Trump is a great moral leader?
What I would say is on these issues that I've talked about, he has advanced moral goods and the common good, and he has resisted grave moral evils like terrorism and abortion on demand.
Ralph, I wish we had more time to talk. I have 1,000 more questions. Maybe we can do it again sometime. Thank you so much for your help and for your goodwill. And we will see you soon.
I'd love to do it anytime, Sally. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, that's about all we have today. I think we've had two really interesting guests and gotten two different perceptions of issues of the day. And now, if you'd like to watch highlights from this or watch the full interview, head over to WashingtonPostLive.com, and you'll also see our calendar of events for this week, and I hope you'll all join us again. I'm Sally Quinn, and thank you so much for watching.